In this video, we're going to compare Apple's M1, M2, and Intel's chips to understand why Apple decided to run away from Intel processors. Let me share with you a secret. Did you know that the MacBook Air based on an M1 chip have performances that can go up to 3.5 times the performance of their Intel counterparts? Not to mention the fact that their autonomy can reach 20 hours, compared to the 10 hours for Intel. And if we add to this the fact that the M2 chip has an 18% faster CPU, a 35% faster GPU, and a 40% faster neural engine than the M1 chip, just imagine the beast you will get! In this comparison, we will examine the differences between their performance and speed, their differences in architecture to understand why Apple's Silicon M chips offers a much better energy, performance, and price ratio than those from Intel. And to nail everything, we'll do a performance comparison between Apple's MacBook Pros and MacBook Airs equipped with M1, M2, Intel chips, and the Intel processor that can beat the M1 Max chips. So, if you want to know which processor will be best for you, watch this video till the end so you don't miss anything. And please, support the channel, like the video, subscribe, and tell us what you think in the comment section below. It's free! Now, let's dive into the heart of the video. In June of 2020, Tim Cook announced the intention for Apple to integrate their own ARM processors on their Macs and abandon Intel's old x86 processors to produce Macs that are much more powerful and less power-hungry. The Apple M1 was Apple's first Apple Silicon chip. It combines both CPU and GPU cores to deliver a faster performance compared to the previous generation of Macs with Intel chips. The M1 chip also includes neural engine cores for machine learning, media encoding and decoding engines, and last but not least, a Thunderbolt 4 controller. It is in November 2020 that Apple started using the M1 chip in the MacBook Air, Mac Mini, and iPad Pro. And the M1 Ultra, which combines two M1 Max chips into one super powerful chip, was introduced in the Mac Studio a few months later. Even though the M1 has been replaced by the M2 in June of 2022, Macs that use the M1 still represent a huge upgrade for most Intel-based Macs. They offer excellent performance per watt, and they can run some iPhone and iPad applications. Like the M1, the Apple Silicon M2 chip combines the CPU and GPU on a single chip with shared memory for much faster performance than systems that separate the CPU and GPU into separate chips. This chip also incorporates ProRes media encoding, which will speed up workflows of creative professionals. But it is only in July of 2022 that Macs with this chip were released: the MacBook Air M2 and the MacBook Pro 13. Compared to more powerful Apple Silicon chips like the M1 Pro, Max, and Ultra, the M2 chip hits a sweet spot in computing power while keeping a low power consumption, which is ideal for smaller machines like the MacBook Pro and the MacBook Air. Now that you are familiar with the Apple Silicon M1 and M2 chips, in the next section of this video, we'll compare their performance, speed, and architecture to Intel chips to see why Macs with the M chip are much better. We all know that Intel has been dominating the computer market since the early 70s. They based their processor design on an architecture called x86, also known as CISC. For all these years, Intel's main focus was to improve the performance and the computing speed of their chips without really worrying about energy consumption. It's understandable when you know that desktops don't really need a battery, and thanks to the ventilation systems, the heat is controlled. At the same time, a new market started emerging, the smartphones and tablets market. And there, the needs are completely different. People want powerful devices with batteries that can last days without interruption. And to address this issue, a new actor managed to impose himself by focusing his technologies around his energy consumption, and this actor is ARM with his RISC architecture. Now, what is the difference with these architectures, RISC versus CISC? The difference is that in Intel's CISC architecture, we are dealing with complex processors with a lot of instructions to play with. The instructions are the requests that the machine is going to make to the processor to perform a precise task, and some instructions in the CISC can be cut and recut into micro-instruction. In contrast to the CISC architecture, the ARM architecture requires less complex instruction, and the programs and the software which are entered into the processor have the same size approximatively. Therefore, the instructions are not cut, and are not micro-cut either, to save a lot of time and computing resources. Moreover, the ARM architecture is based on a system called CISC, in which you can integrate a whole miniature system into a single chip. On these types of chips, you will find the CPU, which is its central unit, the GPU, which is the graphics processor, the RAM, and last but not least, a neural engine like the A16 Bionic, which manages all the artificial intelligence and machine learning for Siri or Face ID, for example. One of the other advantages of the new Macs equipped with the M1 and M2 chips is that they have the same performance on battery as when plugged into the socket, whereas with Intel chips, as soon as the laptop is on battery, the performance drops significantly. Indeed, performance is also one of the factors that prompted Apple to switch their Mac to ARM. This is because Intel has been struggling to reduce the engraving of their processors for a few years now. In case you didn't know, the finer the engraving, the less heat the processor emits, which allows it to increase its computing speed and subsequently its performance without fear of overheating. Now, the M1 chip has a performance ratio at least 3 times higher than their Intel counterparts. And in addition to that, Apple has integrated no less than 16 cores to improve machine learning in their M chips. Thanks to the M chips and their AI features, applications like Pixelmator Pro can increase the resolution of your photos while limiting the loss of quality. Final Cut Pro can learn your habits and speed up your editing process. And what is even crazier is to know that this M1 and M2 chip is only intended for entry-level Macs. Imagine what you can get with the higher-end models. Now, to give you an example, thanks to the M1 chips, the MacBook Air, MacBook Pro 13 inches show a 10-fold performance compared to the previous generation, up to 3.5 times higher on the processor side, 5 times higher for the graphics part, and an autonomy of up to 20 hours. Honestly, we've never seen anything like it during the Intel era. Basically, and to make things simple, a $1,000 MacBook Air is now as powerful as a 16-inch MacBook Pro equipped with an i9 core that costs more than $3,000. And that's where the revolution lies. Because in addition to this transition, Apple is bringing the power of a very high-end Mac to everyone. If we add to this the fact that the M2 chip has an 18% faster CPU, a 35% faster GPU, 50% more memory bandwidth, and a 40% faster neural engine than the M1 chip, then imagine the freedom you will get. Macs running on Intel use an old architecture, so they need much more energy to work than Macs with their M1 and M2 chips, and therefore, more energy consumption means less autonomy with the same battery. On the other hand, the RISC architecture requires fewer operations to perform the same tasks. It therefore consumes about half the energy. And to give you an idea, we are really talking about going from 8 hours to 20 hours of autonomy. So the difference is huge. And if autonomy is something important to you, the choice is quickly made. Now that the basics are set, we'll compare the performance of the Intel-based MacBook Pro and Air to their M1 and M1 chip counterparts, and we will present the Intel 12th generation chip that has a performance that beats the M1 Max chips. These Mac chips designs are very similar, despite minor changes here and there, but the main difference clearly comes from the processors and memory limits. With an Intel MacBook Air, you can choose between different Intel processors, from the dual-core i3 processor with a base clock speed of 1.1 GHz to the quad-core i7 processor with 1.2 GHz base clock speed and turbo that can reach 3.8 GHz. These chips are based on the Intel processor series with Ice Lake architecture and are manufactured using a 10-nanometer process. The graphics calculations are carried out by the Intel Iris Plus graphics. The Apple M1 is also known as a CISC, consisting of an 8-core processor with a GPU with up to 8 cores, a neural engine for AI applications with 16 cores, and other elements such as a buffer and audio processor. The processor cores are divided into 4 performance cores and 4 efficiency cores. Unlike Intel processors, Apple's M1 has a 5nm engraving, which means higher energy efficiency. The M2 chip, on the other hand, has an 8-core GPU. In reality, the processor is 18% faster, the graphics processor is 35% more powerful, and the neural engine 40% more powerful than the M2 chip. The RAM is 8GB on both models in the standard version. The M2 version can be upgraded to 24GB, and its memory bandwidth is boosted to 100GB per second. According to Geekbench benchmarks, the MacBook Air with M1 scored 1,687 points in the single-core test and 7,433 points in the multi-core test. The MacBook Air with Core i7 got 1,140 points in single-core and 3,080 in multi-core. The MacBook Air with M2 chip shows a 12% increase in the single-core test and an 18% increase in the multi-core test compared to those with an M1 chip. According to Apple, the Mac with an M1 and M2 chip can last up to 15 hours for wireless surfing and up to 18 hours for playing movies. These Apple machines share much of the same chassis design, but here we prefer to focus on performance. In terms of hardware and performance, the high-end 13-inch MacBook Pro models continue to use 10th Gen Intel Core chips. They all have a 2.0 GHz quad-core processor, which can easily be customized to a 2.3 GHz quad-core i7 processor. Both Intel models feature Intel Iris Plus graphics. Meanwhile, the 13-inch MacBook Pro M1 is one of the first Macs to be updated with an Apple-designed ARM-based chip rather than an Intel chip like previous MacBook Pro models. This chipset has an 8-core processor and an 8-core integrated graphics processor. The processor has 4 high-efficiency cores and 4 high-performance cores. On the other hand, the high-end MacBook Pro M2 has an 8-core processor and a 10-core GPU. While the number of processor cores remains unchanged, the GPU gets 2 additional cores over the M1 MacBook Pro, which should help things move a little faster in graphics-intensive applications. In addition to an improved GPU core count, the M2 has a dedicated media engine with hardware-accelerated playback for H.264, ProRes, and ProRes RAW. The chip also includes video decoding and encoding engines, as well as a dedicated ProRes encoding and decoding engine for professionals shooting in that format. This is a big step forward for anyone who uses their MacBook for video editing. As far as the memory is concerned, the MacBook Pro M1 is limited to 16GB of RAM, with an 8GB option for those on a tight budget. The MacBook Pro M2, on the other hand, goes up to 24GB, also keeping the first 2 choices. The Intel-based MacBook Pro comes with either 16GB or 32GB of RAM. As for the battery life, according to Apple, the MacBook Pro with an Intel chip offers up to 10 hours of web browsing or up to 10 hours of movie playback, while the Apple machine with M1 and M2 chips offers up to 17 hours for web browsing and up to 20 hours of movie playback. Since Apple abandoned Intel's processors in its Macs in favor of its own in-house chips, Intel has been attacking its former partner in every way imaginable. The latest idea is to compare the speed of the M1 Max against the Core i9 12900HK, which Intel presented as the fastest mobile chip ever created. It features 14 cores which are divided into 8 efficiency cores and 6 performance cores, and a maximum turbo boost frequency of 5 GHz. These characteristics effectively outperform Apple's M1 Max chip, which offers only 10 cores divided into 8 performance cores and 2 efficiency cores. To prove the superiority of its latest Core i9 processor, Intel also stated that its chip has a maximum turbo boost frequency of 5 GHz. If the Core i9 12900HK is a more powerful processor, the company has not managed to do better on energy efficiency. Indeed, the chip consumes up to 115 watts against between 60 and 90 watts for the M1 Max chip. For example, the MSI with this chip requires an average of 100 watts, with peaks up to 140 watts. The MacBook Pro is around 40 watts. Apple remains the undisputed master of the performance-to-watts ratio. The autonomy is also to be put into perspective. When running on battery, the MSI laptop lasts 6 hours in video playback, compared to the 17 hours for the MacBook Pro. The PC is also a beautiful baby with its 17.3-inch screen for 2.9 kilograms against the 16-inch MacBook Pro, which weighs 2.1 kilograms. At the end of the day, Intel is right. This top-of-the-line 12th generation Core i9 is indeed faster. But the M1 Max chip remains the best compromise between performance and battery life. Moreover, the M1 Max chip is exclusive to Macs, which allows Apple to optimize its machines to consume even less energy, and to make greedy applications like video editing applications run smoothly. Clearly, the Apple Silicon M2 chip is the best, but the M1 offers incredible value. The M1 MacBooks are a capable machine for everyday computing, productivity, and even video editing. For those who already have an M1 Mac, you probably don't need to upgrade to M2 unless you really want the MagSafe connector. If you don't own a MacBook and want to buy one, you should probably opt for the M2 model over the M1 if you can afford the extra cost. You'll benefit from increased performance and the best CPU, GPU, and memory options.
Alright guys, that is all for today. Please like the video if you found it helpful, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button for more videos. Check the links in the description for the best up-to-date pricing of all the products mentioned in this video. And don't forget to subscribe, it's free! I hope to see you soon in the next video. Ciao!